talk about volunteer screening policies and risk management. Volunteer risk management is comprised of a number of important components. Every organization has to determine on a case-by-case basis which screening elements are appropriate for their volunteer opportunities. And they may be different from one volunteer role to the next. Background checks and liability insurance for volunteers are the two most obvious components, but it's also important to consider conducting interviews before bringing new volunteers on board. Interviews can help you ensure a good fit for your volunteer placement. Not every volunteer is right for your organization or for every role in your organization, and vice versa. Checking references. Some organizations do, some organizations don't. This might be appropriate for certain roles in your organization and not others. But a simple reference form can sometimes help you get a little more insight into the applicant and help to ensure that the skills they have told you that they have actually been checked out by other folks with whom they've worked. But it is more work, so consider if the time investment in checking references matches the commitment of the volunteer role that you're looking to fill. Policies and procedures. Have written policies on how you interpret background check results or other screening results and determine if those match with what you're looking for. Even if they describe subjectively what the process is for interpreting background check results, for example, have some stuff written down to give you some guidance on those things. Rules and regulations, also have those written down. Go over them at orientation and or training. Include them in your volunteer manual if you have one. Training. Make sure that your volunteers are well trained for what to expect in their volunteer roles. Provide task-specific training, provide safety training and information about emergency and safety procedures. Training does not have to be formal, but it does need to be thorough so that your volunteers in whatever role they're filling know how to stay safe. And supervision and ongoing evaluation. How to determine the necessary screening for your Main Street program. Based on my assessment of a sampling of 9 Colorado Main Street communities, my determination is that extensive screening, including background checks or driving record checks, does not seem necessary for the roles that Main Street volunteers are currently filling. Interviews, however, can be a critical screening element that should be considered for some ongoing volunteer placements, not necessarily for one-time event volunteers, but for board members and other ongoing volunteers. And reference checks can also be really valuable. Samples or templates for both interview questions and reference checks or reference forms can be found in this toolkit. And finally, as you identify and develop new volunteer roles and position descriptions, you'll need to determine on a case-by-case basis what screening requirements are required for each. When determining what screening requirements are required for each volunteer role, you'll want to consider some of the following questions. Looking at, will this volunteer interact with vulnerable populations, which include children, older adults, people who are differently abled in the community? Will they be alone with vulnerable community members? Will they have access to money or financial information? Will they have access to sensitive information like billing information or other contact information for members of your community? Will they have unsupervised access to valuable supplies or sensitive documents? Will they have access to technology accounts like your website, your database, your social media accounts? And will this volunteer be driving on behalf of Main Street? All of those should help inform what sort of screening you feel is necessary for a specific volunteer role. In this section of the toolkit, you'll find a document that outlines some of the concepts and ideas presented in this section in a little bit more detail. You'll find a sample volunteer interview form that you can use as a form itself or just use some of those questions for volunteer interviews depending on the role. Also a sample reference letter and form for checking references, and a couple of valuable resources on limiting your risk and determining screening procedures for volunteers.